Take two. We are looking today at chapter 11, the chapter on autism from our book. I want to recommend a documentary to you called Loving Lamppost. This is a documentary about people with autism. And in that is a quote by a guy named Stephen Shore, who is a professor working with research in the area of autism. And a quote that he's most well known for is, if you've seen one person with autism, you've seen one person with autism. And I think this really gets to the heart of how different and what a varied array of people we have who have this disorder called autism. It is in fact known as an autism spectrum disorder because it's a huge, wide spectrum from red to violet, or infrared to ultraviolet. It just, a huge array of people with myriad different disabilities and abilities. So a few controversies that are out there. There's a group that would like to have autism labeled more as a difference rather than a disorder. That really hasn't caught a whole lot of traction because it is a disorder. So I don't know what's going to come of that. I don't think much, but we'll see. There's also a group out there called Defeat Autism Now. This movement basically says that people can recover from autism. In fact, if you watch the movie, the documentary that we're talking about, you'll see a lady that talks about her son, how thrilled she is that her son recovered from his autism, and he looks back on his time with autism and he's very sad, but now he's happy because he no longer has the autism since he recovered from it. So, that group is out there, but it's it's kind of one of those lifelong things. So I don't think in the research community it has caught much traction, if any. Some of the people that you'll meet, I started to say characters, but they're not characters. They're real people that you meet in Loving Lamppost are Johnny, a performance artist, Barbara, with a refrigerator for a friend, and Dora, who types most of her communication rather than, even talking, verbal communication. So even that is a wide variety. You get into this idea of neurodiversity, difference in thinking and in our nervous system, all that, versus neurotypical. And then we also have the whole dilemma between high functioning and low functioning. What we typically like to think of people with autism are, Temple Grandin. She's famous. She's had movies made about her. She has autism. She's a strange lady. She relates better to cattle than she does to humans. She developed a machine that would hug her because she wanted to be hugged, but she wanted to have total control of it. Didn't want, she hated it when someone would hold on too long in a hug. So she made a hydraulic hugging machine that would hug her, but that she had control of could make it let go when she wanted. So, then we think about Sheldon, very high functioning, funny, all that, but not typical of people with autism. Essential skills, speaking and self-help. Well, those are not things you think of when you think of people with high functioning autism, but the fact is most people with autism operate more in the intellectually disabled range of intellect rather than the savant gifted range like we think of with Temple Grandin or Sheldon. The term autism was coined in 1911 by a Swiss psychiatrist named Eugen Bleuler. It was used by Kenner in 1943 when he did a study where he looked at 11 children who had similar characteristics that he called early infantile autism. Characteristics of autism include that it's onset before the age of 6. There are some who are working now to change this to the age of 3, that they say you need to have witnessed these symptoms before the age of 3, while others are saying, by 3, with the developmental range that we talked about. You remember when we talked about the speech and how different some people progress. I'm currently working in a middle school, and I was talking to some kids today, or listening to them. And one of the boys, two of the boys play football, and they were arguing. And one of them said, "I think I'm as big as you now." And he said, "Well, I weigh 195. The other boy said, "Well, I weigh 186. These were seventh graders. "I weigh 195. I weigh 186. And this other boy sitting there listening to him, he's like, "I weigh 75. You know, so even in seventh grade, there's a huge range. Uh, so kids develop at different rates. So I think maybe the before 3 thing might want to be something we really want to take a look at. Another characteristic is an excellent rote memory. You say a few things and they can repeat them right back to you. Echolalia is this idea, or not idea, practice or whatever, where they repeat things. They repeat things. They repeat things. You might say something and, "Hey, how are you today?" And they might say, "How are you today?" "Well, I'm talking to you." "Well, I'm talking to you." I mean, it's almost like that game that you used to play to annoy your sisters, where they say everything that they said. There's this giant insistence on sameness. They hate change, an inability to relate to others and situations in a normal manner, and a desire to be left alone. It's interesting that this, even though in 1911 we already had a term for this, and by 43 it was being studied, but it wasn't actually acknowledged as a psychiatric disorder until 1980. And then it was first considered a disability under the IDEA in 1990. So, pretty long history between when the term was first coined, and when work was being done on it before it actually became a disability in our education law. So there are 5 spectrum disorders. The first one is just what they call autistic disorder, and this is disruptions in social interaction and communication, and there may be restrictive or repetitive behaviors. I saw a T-shirt a while back that said, "Autistic kids rock," and then you saw the back of it and it said, "or flap, or swing," or and all these different things that kids with autism, these movements, and they call those stereotypical autistic movements. So those are the kind of things that we're talking about here. Asperger's syndrome is some people consider it high functioning autistic. Well, you can have high functioning autism without having Asperger's, but all Asperger's are considered to be high functioning autistic. There are not the communication impairments that we typically think of, and there's not a significant cognitive delay. People with Asperger's typically have a high IQ. They don't have problems really communicating, but they do have some of the other issues that go along with the social interaction. A lot of them do not want to be hugged or touched. Can have some of these things where they really like to be alone, like to have time to themselves to a much greater degree than what would ordinarily be considered normal. Rett syndrome is the third one here. It's a rare disorder and it's found only in females. They develop like their typical peers until sometime between the age of 6 months and 18 months. And then evidence of hypotonia, uh, reduced eye contact, their head growth begins to slow, and they are not interested in play activities. Following that, there's a rapid developmental regression, uh, hand wringing, they walk with very unsteady gait, irregularities in breathing. They have problems with sweeting. Just made a word out of feeding and swallowing. With feeding and swallowing, and severely limited language development, and typically seizures will go along with Rett syndrome. We have childhood disintegrative disorder. This is a rare disorder. It typically begins to develop during the first 2 years of life. And then this regression happens between the ages of 2 and 10. Affected areas include language, social skills, functional behavior, bowel, bladder control, or motor skills, and characteristics of autism are also evident. So it's, I don't know, I kind of hate to use this idea, but kind of the Benjamin Button thing. The kid's developing fine and then kind of begins to undevelop. They may have been able to go to the bathroom on their own, all that kind of thing, and now they can't. Um, they they started getting language and using it. I mean, you think of the language ability of a 10-year-old, and then that begins to go away. Um, so it is very rare, but it is on the autism spectrum. The last one is pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified, PDD-NOS. This is diagnosed when a child displays some, but not all of the characteristics of autism. And I don't know. I think this might be an area where people think somebody got over autism, because you could have a child like this who displays some of these characteristics, and then a doctor would say, okay, he has autism and that he has this PDD-NOS, and then finds out, well, that really wasn't the problem after all. So I could see how somebody would think, oh, they recovered from autism, but it's actually not the case. I think it would be more of an issue of a misdiagnosis. All right, prevalence. Wide disagreement. We used to hear that there were, 10 per 10,000 or 1 in 1,000. Then it's, 1 in 120. And then it's, I heard one the other day, 1 in 67 children has autism. Wow. Um, it's almost like they're recruiting. It used to be that people didn't want their child labeled with a disability whatsoever, and then it was okay, if I've got to have a disability, I'll go with learning disability, LD. That's, and best yet, let's go with dyslexia. I mean, that everybody likes that. But now autism seems to be a catch-all, um, and there's a number of reasons. One is, I think, the popularity. More and more people know about it, so more and more people begin to, it's kind of like the old saying, if your only tool is a hammer, then everything's a nail. If you know that this is out there, and basically any kind of strange behavior of a kid can fit in there one way or another, then becomes a pretty popular thing to have. Um, so the definition has changed as well, where more people now can fit into it than what used to be. So the definition is not as restrictive. It's more popular. It's very socially acceptable. Thanks to Temple Grandin, thanks to Sheldon, thanks to um, the whole autism puzzle piece world out there, that has really brought a lot of attention to this disability. 0.29% of children ages 3 to 21 receive services under the AU category through the IDEA, but that figure is not accurate anymore. I don't know when this figure came out, probably when the book came out, but you see it's growing at a rate of about 10% per year. And gender prevalence, more guys than girls. I did a look at the disabilities in Texas. Last year, there were about 587,000 students with disabilities, and 87,000 of those were labeled with autism. So, what do we say? There are about 10%, roughly, in Texas. About 10% of our kids qualify under IDEA one way or another. So you take that and 13%, so that's 1.3%. Yeah, so where this was talking about 0.29, now we're at 1.3. So that number has grown huge. We talk about high incidence and low incidence disabilities. Well, autism is becoming a high incidence disability, even though in the past it was low incidence. In fact, for a while, it was just considered as part of the emotionally disturbed, the ED label, until in 1990 it got its own category. Causation, again, we like to talk about causation, but we don't know. We know there are some factors, psychological factors, there are environmental factors, there's certainly biological and genetic factors, but is it a cause? Got these factors, but I don't think any of these are going to show causation. Now you can have we have some signs that you can look for in little kids, and spins objects. Okay, what kid doesn't try to spin an object? But if this is a repetitive, a sustained behavior, sustained odd play, little or no eye contact, shouldn't be severe. It should be severe language deficits, an insistence on sameness, this real hatred for change, uneven gross versus fine motor skills. What are we talking about? Okay, this kid may not be able to kick a ball, which is a gross motor skill, but could stack dominoes very precisely. That's an unevenness. By the time a kid has the fine motor skills to stack dominoes or something like that, they should have the gross motor skills to be able to kick a ball. Laughs, cries, or becomes distressed for no apparent reason. And then extremes in activity, either over or under, or overly active or they're underactive. Difficulty in expressing their needs. They gesture, they point instead of speaking. Non-responsive to verbal cues. Oftentimes we think there is a hearing issue with this child because they can just flat out ignore you as if you're not there. The echolalia that we talked about, where they repeat words that they hear from you or from someone else, or noises that they hear, they can echo them, parrot them if you want to use that term. Inappropriate attachments to objects. We talked about it in the lamppost movie that there's a lady whose friend is with a refrigerator. They may not want cuddling or to act cuddly. I'll tell you, I have a daughter who we never had her diagnosed because there was never an educational need, but she has all the symptoms of someone with Asperger's. And it was really strange to me because my older daughter every night wanted to be cuddled and rocked before being put down to bed. And so I would rock Cassidy, and and sing to her and all that kind of thing and put her to bed. And she just loved it. And then you'd go into Caroline's room and uh, start to hold her and rock her and cuddle her. And she didn't want any part of it. Kind of hurt your feelings as a daddy. But, um, you know, came to appreciate she had a lot of other strengths. Um, you know, you'd go in there in the middle of the night sometime and she would be awake with 10 or 12 books in her crib and be reading books at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, looking through each one. Um, but where the other one, if she was awake in the night, she'd want you to, hug her, cuddle her, rock her back to sleep. Not that one. So um, that's part of it. Unresponsive to normal teaching methods sometimes, oversensitivity or undersensitivity to pain. Some of them can be really injured and they won't show any response to the pain. Um, had two kiddos that had the uh, developmental disorder that we talked about earlier, where they continue to regress, for lack of a better term. Um, the, the disintegrative disorder, and they would bite their arms when they would get frustrated about anything. They would bite their arms. Two brothers that behaved this way, to where their arms just became like giant calluses from all of the arm biting, and didn't seem to be painful to them at all. Um, so you have that end of it, or then you have the kid that seems just overly sensitive to the pain. Some of them have kind of an aloof manner, difficulty mixing with others. Just kind of, it's like they're above you and they got no use for you. And that's pretty much how it is. They really don't. They're fine without you. This is where the autism part of it comes in. The whole self. Generally, characteristics are social. They do not have the social skills or the social interaction or even the desire for such that their typical peers would have. Communication, because of this, lack of social skills and the fact that they don't really feel the need to communicate. It is a communication disorder for sure. Behaviorally, like we talked about, many of them don't want to be touched. They don't want to be close to people. Um, and they will do what they need to do to keep people from touching them. Uh, because my youngest daughter didn't want to be touched, and she especially didn't want to be kissed, then my oldest daughter always made sure to hug her and kiss her, and just drove her nuts. So, uh, things to think about. Cognitive characteristics, low IQ. Well, I don't see that in Sheldon. I don't see that in Temple Grandin. Well, those are the exceptions, right? Not the rule. Difficulty in executive functioning, deficits in theory of mind, um, this whole idea of perspective taking. I don't get it. Don't get it at all. Uh, why should I think about what you're thinking? Why should I care what you're thinking? That doesn't matter. Could have real strengths in visual skills. Had a young man that would do anything in the world to get to look at fractals on TV, on the computers or the television screens that we had in the classrooms. Had a real strength in that visual area and wanted it to be stimulated, which he did with the fractals. All right, identification. There's early screening, looking for those symptoms or evidences that we talked about earlier. There's also diagnosis in clinics. You can go and get your child identified. Um, there are some clinics in the Fort Worth area that are kind of known for if you want to get an autistic label for your child and come here and you can basically buy it from us. Um, so, that's out there. But if schools are going to do this, they're going to use an autism team. The autism team is made up of a school psychologist, an educational diagnostician, a speech pathologist, and the occupational therapist. Now, the difference in an occupational therapist and a physical therapist is your occupational therapist works with your fine motor skills, while your physical therapist works with your gross motor skills. So in this case, we're going to use the occupational therapist, and they're going to be looking for the deficits in socialization and communication. Now, you'll see that the school psychologist is bolded there. Well, here's why. We in schools like to do things that make people feel good. The whole idea of having an autism team is so warm and fuzzy, and we've got a team of experts looking at this condition. We got a team of experts studying this child to determine if the child truly has autism or not. The fact is, the diagnostician, the pathologist, the speech person, the therapist, occupational therapist, none of these people has the credentials to say anyone has autism. The only person that has those credentials, that has that licensure, that has the ability to have that professional opinion is a school psychologist. So basically, you could kick everybody else off the team, and he or she alone could say this child has autism. Same token, if they decide the child does not have, if the school psychologist decides this child does not have autism, then everybody else on the team could say, oh, yes, he does. If the school psychologist doesn't sign off on it, the kid doesn't have autism. So it's a team, it's a nice fuzzy thing, but the reality is only one person on that team has the credentials to be able to make that diagnosis. Hopefully, they're getting the input from the rest of the team and they're going to work together well. All right. So, what do we do with instruction? Well, it is very, very important that we get on this early. Like several of our different disabilities, if we get on it early and we start our interventions early, we have a very good chance of affecting great change. If we don't, the longer it goes without being diagnosed, the more ingrained many of these social behaviors are that are going to impede their learning. Applied behavior analysis, you may have heard about ABA, is huge these days. When I was going through school, I don't know if it was a thing. I don't know when they actually started with this, but we were more into behaviorism or functional behavioral analysis and these sorts of things. Applied behavior analysis, some of the keys are that it happens, in the right environment. It's not a clinical thing. It happens at school or it happens at home. There are even some court cases now that, court cases have always been very careful about not telling schools how to do. They'll tell them what to do, make sure the child's making progress and all that, but you're the expert, you decide how. But we've got court cases out there now where a school was not using ABA. The parents hired somebody to do ABA, and the court came in and said, ABA works, what you're doing doesn't. So now you use ABA and you pay for the ABA that's already been done. So I think this is something that's going to continue. And there are certifications in applied behavior analysis. There are schools now that are wanting you to have ABA certification before you come to work for them as a behavior interventionist, that sort of thing. So it seems to be the going thing right now. That will change. always does. But for right now, applied behavior analysis is a big deal. Communication, we need to teach these kiddos how to communicate, how to listen, and how to speak. They need the incoming uh, and the outgoing both to be coached and taught. Social skills, many of them just don't have social skills. And of course, you got a lot of them that are low enough that they're not going to get typical social skills, but we still need to work on at least the social skills of not hurting self or others and those kinds of things. Kiddos with